Yeah, Leonie start.
Good morning. I'd like to welcome everybody to the Play, Recreation and Sport meeting today on the 17th of June. I'd like to open the meeting and explain that we are being recorded and it will be on the Council's website. First off, I'd like to, explain the health and safety requirements for the Conference and Function Centre. This information, so we do, in this facility, we have a male and female toilet located on both the ground floor and the first floor of this venue. We also have exits that are visibly displayed, and they you go out this entry here, which is at the back here behind Hannah, and if we do have an emergency, we will follow Hannah outside the back exit. We also have first aid kit available, and we have a defibrillator available as well. And we will make use of those emergency exits if we do have an evacuation. The assembly points are in front of the building, and we will assembly on the lawn if we need to, if there was an emergency. Right, moving on to the next thing. First off, for the Play, Recreation and Sport meeting, we'd like to first off call for apologies. First off, I've got Councillor Utakiri. Is there any other apologies for this meeting, which will potentially start at 1 o'clock after Finance? No, I'll move the apologies, seconded by Councillor Meehan. If we could now vote. We'll vote by voice. Thank you. All in favour?
Aye.
That's been carried. Thank you. We'll now close the meeting to the end of financing performance. Is that what it's called?
Audit.
Audit, sorry, it's now changed its name. Finance and audit, and we'll commence after that has been finished. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Harpeta. And I will now open the Finance and Audit Committee meeting of the 17th of June. First up, before we go through our business, I would like to welcome our new independent committee member onto our committee, which is Steve Armstrong. And so welcome, Steve. We're very happy to have you with us. And if you would just like to speak for a minute and just introduce yourself, that would be.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Look, the first thing I'd like to say is that I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to be the independent member on council, and I'm really looking forward to making a good fist of that and adding some value. About me in a professional sense, I am a chartered accountant. I have an MBA with a focus or emphasis on corporate governance, and I'm a member of the New Zealand Society of Directors. From a career perspective, the last 30 odd years of my executive career saw me in senior finance and commercial roles in large organisations that impacted or touched on significant parts of the New Zealand economy. So I spent almost 15 years in the dairy industry, where I held roles here in New Zealand, in the USA, and in Latin America. I have over a decade of experience now in the energy sector in New Zealand, where I've held roles in upstream oil and gas and downstream electricity. I've been associated with one of the country's largest property groups and been involved in construction, and had a crack at financial services at one stage in my career when I was CFO of the New Zealand Stock Exchange. So I guess when I think about some of those companies and industries that I've worked in, they're very capital intensive, lots of infrastructure spend, quite complex organisations in many respects with significant and different supply chains. So, and many of them are very capital constrained also. So I'm hoping once I've got my head around how council works that I can add some value in those issues. Personally, I'm married to Kath, and we're blessed with a large and diverse family. We live in Paraparaumu Beach. My executive career has finished, so these days I'm involved in some governance roles, of which this is one, and I also do some consulting for a couple of companies that I've been associated with in my career. So I'm really pleased and honoured to be here, and thanks for the opportunity. And that's, I guess, a pretty potted history of me, but happy to download offline if anyone's interested, and really, really looking forward to making a good contribution. So thanks very much.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Armstrong. And the Mayor would like to speak.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Steve. Look, councillors, I think this is we enter a new phase with this Finance and Audit Committee, with having an independent member. And as Steve said, he has a long executive career in the dairy, utilities, property, and many of the commercial entities within New Zealand. And it's good to have another chartered accountant around our table and Institute of Directors. But I think the great thing that Steve brings is he's done a lot of infrastructure work, and as we enter that phase of our council life, I think he'll absolutely give us a skill set which this council will need around the financing of that infrastructure. So the appointment panel, obviously we're delighted to have Steve's nomination or application to this committee, and we had absolutely no hesitation in recommending it to you as a council. So welcome, Steve, and we look forward to working alongside you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And council is correct. Acknowledge it's Mr. Armstrong, so you know how to address. Right, so I'll now move on to our agenda, and I'd just like to acknowledge our manager, Customer Services Manager, Chris Dyberg, is on remote and hopefully can hear us. So we'll now move to the apologies. So I have the Deputy Mayor as an apology. Are there any other apologies? There being none, I'll move the apologies. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Dennison, and we'll vote on the voices. All those in favour? Aye. Carried. Any against? No. I have no notice of additional items, so I'll move on to item number 3, which is any declarations of interest. I'm not aware of any. There's no declarations of interest. I'll now move on to item number 4, which is public comment. I'm not aware of any public comment, unless anybody snuck in behind me. Nope. So we will now move on to confirmation of the minutes. I'm happy to move the minutes. The seconder, thank you, Councillor Johnson. I'll move that the minutes be accepted. I'll take it on the voices. All those in favour? Aye. Carried. Anyone against? None. So we'll now move on to item number 6, which is on page 13, which is the Palmerston North Airport Board, and presented by Steve Patterson. So welcome, gentlemen. Steve, if you could please introduce, thank you.
Morning, everybody. It's my pleasure indeed to welcome today David Lanham, who's the Chief Executive of the Palmerston Airport Limited, and John Nichols, who's the Chair of the Audit and Risk Committee of the company. In terms of today's agenda, we're talking again about the Statement of Intent. As you'll remember, we had a presentation from the board presenting a draft Statement of Intent back in March. That had been prepared prior to quite significant impacts on both the company and the country by one little bug. And so we asked them to go away and to present to us an updated version, and that's what they've done here today. And they have a presentation to make to us, and I'll make a couple of comments after that's finished.
Well, kia ora everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to present to you today. Murray Georgiel, who is our chair, is unable to make it today, so you've got me today. I chair the Audit and Risk and always appreciate the chance to meet and chat with the shareholder. That little bug that Steve referred to has caused quite a lot of angst around the world and continues to do so, but we've tried to approach this at Palmerston North Airport with a glass half full approach. We've worked pretty closely with our main customer Air New Zealand to understand what their desires and expectations are for the new world. You'll notice, and I'll hand it over to David shortly he's got a presentation for you, is that what we're trying to encourage this year is a one-step, two-step approach with the Statement of Intent, whereas we still face a considerable amount of uncertainty, as do most organisations. And our recommendation to you is that we have to put a stake in the sand at some stage, and we see that being today and after discussions, and then re-present in October when we have a better view of what passenger numbers are looking like, what revenue's looking like, and we can then have a better estimate of showing 3 years in the SOI, because currently we've only got 12 months in the SOI, which is most unusual. That's never happened before. But to be honest, as a board, we probably met 9 times, 10 times over Zoom during the period of the COVID time and looked at the SCI, every time we met. And our view was, if we put projections after this year, there will be pie in the sky, but we're pretty confident that by October we'll be able to have a better perspective of where we think we'll get to.
John, just sorry to interrupt. In our papers, it's got September as.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Is that just clarify?
Yeah, sure. September, October, but we should, because Air New Zealand, if we take a glass half full, we'll have 6 flights a day. I don't want to steal David's thunder, but we'll have 6 flights a day to Auckland, 5 to 6 flights a day fairly soon, and things are appearing to come back quicker than we anticipated. But things like yesterday don't help, the couple of cases. So there still is considerable uncertainty, but Air New Zealand's positive, we're being positive, and that's probably an ideal time to throw it over to David. If there's no initial questions, I'm more than happy to answer any, or just pause us during the presentation, whichever prefers.
We'll go to David and then we'll have questions at the end of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Excellent. Thank you. So thanks again for the opportunity.
Morena, good morning, everybody. I wanted to start with just a brief update on the current financial year, being F19-20. As John alluded to, are positive signs from our primary client, Air New Zealand. We are currently operating at 5 Auckland flights a day, down from our 10 to 12 a day pre-COVID, but still 5 a day at the moment is pretty encouraging. And equally, Christchurch is operating 3 times a day. Pre-COVID, they were up to 4 a day. So some positive signs are coming back already. For the current year, we are predicting 488,000 passengers. We were previously looking at something like 475,000. So again, we're reflecting in real time the indications we're seeing from our airline and feedback from them on customer loads. Pre-COVID, of course, we were looking at 660,000 for the year. The graph there shows you 2 financial years and really indicates the impact of COVID being April, May and June, where I think in total we carried something like 20,000 passengers perhaps from looking at that. So significant hit April, May, June, but as I said, we're seeing some positive signs, and July August we'll have 5 flights to Auckland and 3 to Christchurch. So in terms of the full year financial view, cutting to the chase, we were predicting a net profit after tax result of just under 2 million. That will be about 1 million for the current financial year. Okay, moving into the new financial year being F 2021. The key point is that we don't see any change in our medium-term strategic priorities. We still want to be New Zealand's leading regional airport. We still want to be investing in our infrastructure. We still want to be investing in Ruapehu Business Park. However, in the very short term, we need to be very careful given the uncertainty that we're facing. So as I mentioned, July, August is already looking very positive with schedules at circa 40% of pre-COVID levels. Positive signs in passenger volumes, particularly the leisure market, very strong over the school holidays with bookings. We are though seeing a little bit of negativity in terms of business bookings at this stage. We hope it's just early days. We hope that businesses are reassessing travel plans, etc. for their staff, and that we'll see some positivity post July school holidays. The very good factors that we have in our favour, as you can see on the slide, really, as we all know around this table, we are a well-diversified regional economy. So we don't necessarily get hit by the loss of inbound tourism that other regions are feeling. Equally, as we're all very well aware, a lot of spend is happening, about to start, which again is positive for passenger volumes. So as I said, in terms of business bookings, they're not quite where Air New Zealand would like them at the moment, but again, we're thinking it's early days. We are concerned that there is uncertainty. Perhaps we could see a second wave of COVID. We have Air New Zealand comments in the media such as we'll be 30% smaller in a year. So we need to balance the positives with some of these signals as well in coming to a number today. But we're already, as I said, seeing positive signs, and so while we submitted an SOI at 265,000 passengers 11th of May, we're now more confident that the number could be at least 100,000 higher than that, again, given the signals received from Air New Zealand. So we're now talking today in a range of 265,000 passengers, to 361,000 passengers. So you'll see there the yellow line was our view just a few weeks ago on passenger numbers by month. We're now considering it's more likely to be the red line. And who knows, by September, by October, we'll be in a stronger position to predict what the numbers are. For us in the airline and passenger business, it's very hard to predict numbers. You can see there why. Here's the slide that shows our history at Palmerston North Airport since 1995. So you'll see there's a red dotted line. That's our long run average growth rate. And you'll see that our orange line, which is our total passenger numbers, floats around that long run average. It got quite high, early 90s, of course, with Freedom Air and some investment by Air New Zealand in additional domestic services. We then had the loss of Freedom and also the GFC, which put us back down to that line. And then, of course, more recently, we've been very lucky to have seen Jetstar arrive at our regional port, and equally Air New Zealand investing in additional domestic capacity. And we got up to the heady heights of nearly 700,000 passengers. So we're sitting here today with some uncertainty, but again, October we think we'll have a better view of just where that number could end. So the uncertainty in passenger numbers must flow through to financial uncertainty for us. Over 50% of our revenue comes from aeronautical sources, i.e. passengers, and therefore we need to be cautious about our financial projections. On this slide, the top line, I'm showing the pre-COVID SOI result of 665,000 passengers for F2021, which had a corresponding net profit after tax result of 3.4 million. Today, we're talking a base case of 265,000 passengers, being that last line, with revenue of 6.25 million. So crudely half of the revenue that we were predicting pre-COVID. But again, last few weeks, indications are that perhaps we'll get to 360,000, which adds crudely about 1 million or just over 1 million of revenue. So significantly difficult for us right now to be predicting that revenue number. But what I can say is that costs for us, like council, are very fixed, quite high fixed costs. Not much room to move in terms of cost reductions, but we have managed to achieve about a $650,000 saving, which goes some way to offsetting the revenue loss, but not, unfortunately, doesn't cover it all, of course. So the result in terms of a bottom line, as prepared in the SOI letter that went to council, is a loss of about 900,000. But again, we might break even based on the 360,000 passenger number being met. John talked about the many meetings we've held over the COVID period via Zoom. There's been much head scratching and decisions being made about what we can continue to invest in the short term. Again, our medium term targets remain the same. In terms of investment in infrastructure, investment in Ruapehu Business Park. But the short-term period, we need to be very, very careful given that financial uncertainty. So you'll see there the goals of our board being to preserve capital, to maintain a prudent approach to our debt levels, to be very wary of our financial ratios, but equally the last point, we've got to continue to focus on our customers as well. So as a result, we have trimmed our capital expend for the year down to 4.7 million from something around 11, I think, from memory, pre-COVID. The 4.7 million is essential Capex. So we're talking airside pavement rejuvenation. That's an ongoing project for us. You're well aware of our asset management plan. And the more we develop that plan, the more focused we become on the airside asset. And that comes at a cost, of course. So we've got to continue focusing on our pavements. Equally, terminal seismic work will continue. It's a relatively modest number, I think, in the scheme of things. I think it's around 600, 700,000, but that must continue. Equally, end-of-life air conditioning within the terminal needs to be replaced. And we do need to replace our 2 rescue fire vehicles. So again, in terms of the short term, there's 2 major projects that have needed to be deferred. One being the terminal development plan. So you're well aware of the plans pre-COVID, which were really predicated on facilitating future growth in passenger numbers, facilitating the potential mandating of security screening for passengers and hold baggage, and equally facilitating the possible return of jet services, domestic jet services to Palmerston North. Now, obviously, one of those 3 objectives is not there now in terms of the passenger volumes, but equally security screening and equally jets are still things that could occur in the medium term. However, in the short term, with a price tag of $15 million, we simply can't afford to continue with that project right now, with the exception of the seismic strengthening aspect of it. Now, we are in the running still, I hope, fingers crossed, for shovel-ready funding for that project. We haven't heard anything negative, so fingers and toes crossed. Equally, pre-COVID, last year we went in for a Provincial Growth Fund grant for, I think, 5 million of that 15 million. So both of those are still live, and who knows, that might just change our thinking a little bit over the coming weeks. Ruapehu Business Park is our second major project that we are needing to defer just ever so slightly. Ironically, we all know around this table that the reason we are investing in Ruapehu Business Park is to further diversify our revenue away from aeronautical. So it's ironic really that it's an aeronautical downswing that's caused us to have to defer this one. The price tag for the full park is around $10.3 million. And again, that's just too much for us right now. So we have considered many options for Ruapehu Business Park. We appreciate the value, the signals that it sends to our region and our city of investing in it. We've looked at many options for it. We are continuing with the engineering design and working very hard with Tom's team and Chris's team on getting the consents in place. But in terms of actually turning soil, we just are not in a position to be able to do that right now. So in terms of our funding position, we are well placed to be able to afford the $4.7 million of essential Capex that I talked about. That falls within our existing bank lending facility and provides us with some modest headroom for uncertainties. However, we do have challenges in terms of our lender compliance and ratios. We are in discussion with our bank, and our bank has been very supportive of us to date.
From a director's point of view, of course, we do need the support of our lenders. Anytime we've got an SOI that shows a loss and even a modestly good case break even, you've got to have the support of your bank to even do that minimal amount of Capex. So we do have facility remaining with our banker, who is Bank of New Zealand, but we've had to have discussions with them, and we'll have to make some contractual changes to our facilities to avoid any unpleasantness with the bank. So to date, they've been very good, but if I'm frank, if things don't pick up to that level and beyond, we've got quite a few issues looming on the horizon. And banks, understandably, the banks are committed to the existing facility, but if we ask them for an extended facility, for example, to do Ruapehu Business Park, without the airport doing very well to underpin that investment, they're extremely cautious of that, and I can understand that. And as a board, we've got to make sure that the remaining facility that we've got is actually targeted at essential Capex for the airport to keep it open. But we don't have, and this is no, I mean, you look at New Plymouth Airport, Hawke's Bay Airport, they'll probably been tapping their shareholder for relief, to be honest. And what I'm saying for us is we do have a very receptive bank currently, but I've got to be frank, and it's not a bottomless bucket, and we need the airport to pick up so we can maintain our core facility and then extend it to do more. So that's the position we're at. But to date, BNZ has been very receptive, very positive. Management's worked really hard. We've got a good relationship at the board level, but we need that support with them, because if they pull that support, we've got a real problem. But to date, they've been excellent.
Thanks, John. So, of course, we have been in discussion with officers of PNCC. There's possibly many ways to skin the cat with Ruapehu Business Park, and we're continuing to explore those opportunities as well. So in terms of an update on performance metrics, and what you have here is the F1920 updated column, the first column. The second and third column reflect the base case SOI as sent in May, and then the mild recovery to 360,000. So you'll see there the impact, the positive impact that the mild recovery, if it happens, has, particularly in terms of our net surplus after tax ratio to shareholder funds, and equally our interest coverage ratio, the second to last metric. And following on from that, the second page of the performance metrics, some of our other key performance indicators, obviously zero lost time injury. Net promoter score, we're still targeting an increase there to 50. And you'll see the next line indicates the 360,000 versus the 260 odd thousand passenger volumes. roadmap to carbon neutrality. We haven't forgotten about that. We've still got our team working hard on level 2 of that, with the view that the actual map plan itself is completed this month. And while we've already started implementing aspects of that plan, obviously you'll see there in 2021 we continue to implement those plans. There have been some changes in terms of some of the metrics around emission reductions. Obviously, with passenger numbers halving, that makes some of the metrics look distorted. So we're currently working with Airports Council International, who have the ACA accreditation plan, and working through just what airports in general can do about ratios that involve passenger numbers. And finally, as alluded to, we would like to come back in September or October. Perhaps October would give us a better feel. That would give us 1 quarter of the new financial year under our belt, but of course over to the committee to decide on that. That's the presentation. If you have any questions.
Okay, thank you. Open to questions. First up, Councillor Ruapehu.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thank you very much for your presentation. Just my first question is around the Ruapehu Business Park. It's really based on having people that want to invest in it. Have you got any indication from the market that people do actually want to be a part of the Ruapehu Business Park?
Yes, there's still strong interest in the park. The unique point of difference that we have is that we've got relatively small lots compared to, say, the northeastern industrial. So there's a market for the lots that we are offering.
So the other question, and I don't know if I'm getting into commercially sensitive area, but is there a way in which we could look, and I don't know if the board have looked at this, in terms of sharing our risk with a partner?
Absolutely. It's a very good question. That's the only way it'll work short to medium term, is we have to, when you've got a strong balance sheet and things are flowing, you think that's great, we can get the money and lend it. But a collaboration strategy, partnership strategies, etc., are all things that are right on our radar now, because that's the best way to stop it from stalling. Is if there's private capital that wants to invest and co-invest with us, there's plenty of ways of how we can cut that up. So it just means we may have to modify our model. So that's a really good point. It's something that's right top of mind with the board.
Okay. Thank you.
And the bank.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Councillor Rutherford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your presentation. I've just got one question. If you were successful with the PGF fund and the shovel ready, what capacity have you got to sort of move forward with both of those projects concurrently with the current climate?
So those two opportunities relate to the terminal development plan only, and not Ruapehu Business Park. If we receive shovel ready funding, which is 15 million, we would start immediately. We have the capacity, we can upsize to do that. If we received the grant, or if we received a grant under the PGF, we'd have to look carefully at how we did the project, because it's only 5 million of 15. So both of them would give us the opportunity to start in some form.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks, David and John. Couple of questions. One is around the cost savings. So I think you said in your presentation that the cost savings for this final quarter of this financial year were 550,000, and that the predicted savings for the whole of 2021 year are 650,000. So I'm just wondering, if the cost savings for a quarter were 550,000, why are the cost savings for a year not much different?
The savings in 1920 relate to the entire year, so we've been ahead of the curve all year, really.
Okay, thank you for that. And then in terms of the performance metrics, so on page 26 of our papers, which is page 7 of your report, you've got the net promoter score forecast for 2021 at 55, but I think in your presentation you had it at 50. So which of those is it, or is there a discrepancy there?
It's now 50.
Okay.
We're expecting there'll be a degree of a negativity within the travelling community around everything to do with air services, and that's likely to impact on us. So we're just being pragmatic.
Okay, thank you. And then you did mention that on page 3 of your statement of intent, which is page 22 of our papers, that you recognise that we have a multicultural community and you plan to engage with it, but there aren't any specifics around that. Could you give us any more detail about that?
Well, really, it's a continuation of the work we've done previously, whether it be direct sponsorship with various community organisations, closer relationships of Rangatane, that's ongoing. It's been something that's very close to my heart personally for the last few years. So the various things we do in a modest way will continue.
Okay, so that's a continuation rather than anything new.
It's a continuation, but look, we have to be modest about it and prudent in what we're doing now, given the revenue that we're looking at. But we'll still be out there and touching various parts of our community.
Good, thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, David, and thanks, John. Good to see you both. Couple questions for me. The first one just relates around the environmental metrics. I know that last time you were here, they were to be confirmed, and you obviously intended to bring them back. And I understand you've had the biggest curveball you've ever seen sort of thrown at you, so I'm not concerned about not seeing them yet, but I just want to understand, in September, October, do you hope to have it landed by then, or when will those become visible?
Yeah, yes, definitely. We want to see what our passenger forecast is, and that'll help us with any metrics that relate to passenger numbers. By then, our plan is completed, and we've got another 3 months under our belt of implementation.
Great, thank you. The other question I had was really just sort of more I guess where the strategic thinking's sort of really going, and in that you already had before COVID a diversification strategy in place, and it was really setting up well. And I just I guess we've got a big lesson on what it looks like when you have all your eggs in one basket, and just wondering if that's sort of changing the balance of view around the importance of diversification and how you might prioritize that.
It's a really good question. And ironically, I think because we've got jets coming in with in the evening with a whole bunch of parcels and everything else, and we've got Massey as a outstanding rental partner at the airport. We've actually done better than a lot of other regional airports as far as diversification goes. And I live in Hawke's Bay, so I kind of know what they've been doing, and they don't have a lot of diversification, but it just really does show the benefit. I just wish we were far more diversified right now, but we've still had some money coming in, to be blunt, through April and May. A lot of others, I saw in the paper that New Plymouth Airport had $50,000 coming into their tills for 3 months, April, May, June, 50,000. They got a $20 million terminal. So I'm sure they've got some real challenges. So we had some diversification, but as David said, all we've really done is hit that pause point. And if we want to develop Ruapehu Business Park, we're going to just have to be more creative of how we actually get that away. So our traditional model of borrow, sell a few, build to build it, we're just going to have to be more creative, because if anything, this has highlighted that diversification is a real plus. And it saved us a little bit, to be frank, but it would have been so much nicer if 50% of our revenue was diversified rather than 15 to 20. So it hasn't derailed our strategy. It's made us pause. It made us talk to the bank a lot more closely, but we just see it as a pause. And if we're sitting here in 2 years' time, it'd be lovely that it had been a lot more developed than we are now. So.
Great, thank you both, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Question directed for you, Steve, but open to comment from David or John. In regards to in October when the SOI is coming back to this committee, whether or not the projections for the second and third year, maybe we could hold them off to the new year where the uncertainty might land a little bit clearer for us, because I could see that even then for year 2 and 3, the variables would be so different when we're looking at trying to get some clearer picture what the future may look like when we're talking about the capital investment and whatnot. So I'm just wondering about splitting that up into a two-step approach, whether having the update in October, but doing the confirming year 2 and 3 maybe in February, for example. Your thoughts, Steve?
My thoughts are that it's useful to have a longer term perspective if we can, and if things are settled down enough. And so I'd be encouraging the company to be able to come to us with their best estimates of what year 2 and 3 are looking like at the time. And obviously they can be changed when it comes to the SOI for the following year again. But I think it's important to have a longer term perspective than just entirely a short term perspective.
Happy with that. Thank you.
Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, gentlemen, for your report. My question is probably a long one. About replacing those fire trucks or fire extinguisher, whatever. Are those vehicles meant for the surrounding communities as well, or exclusively for the airport? Number one. Number two, how many times these vehicles have been used in the past 2 years? And number three, what is the reason to replace them now?
Good questions. So the vehicles are not designed to be driven on outside of the airport. They have specific foam on board, which is for aircraft fires. They're not intended to be used for community use. Second question, sorry.
How many times they have been used in the last 2 years?
Thankfully, not with regards to any incident where foam had to be used. But of course, training happens all the time using those. And third question in relation to the life of the trucks, they are essentially nearing the end of life. And we feel it's prudent that we make a move now rather than wait another year or two for that end of life to occur.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, gentlemen. Couple of questions, Madam Chair. Total number of flights a day at the moment, and then obviously Auckland, Christchurch, Wellington, Hamilton, Nelson, all still going?
So we have 37 flights a week to Auckland, and we have 19 a week to Christchurch, and we have Origin Air operating 4 times a week to Nelson at this stage.
And Hamilton, Wellington yet to come back?
No news yet on Wellington and Hamilton.
And diversification thing's been answered. Airways, air traffic control made some big decisions in the lockdown. Palmerston North survived, where some of our other regional colleagues didn't.
That's correct. So Airways, in terms of the tower at Palmerston North Airport, is business as usual. No impact to date.
And fire services, further to my colleague Councillor Butt's comments, have we always done the fire service, like the capital cost of fire services, or was that a contracted service? I can never recall us having any R&M around big ticket items like that for fire services.
No, you're right. We haven't. So rescue fire has been outsourced since MOT outsourced rescue fire back in I think it was the late 80s. So our provider has been around since I think the mid-90s. So that's a contracted service, and they provide all the equipment. We've made the call that we need to control the equipment now, and hence why we're looking at purchasing 2 second-hand but refurbished appliances.
Right, so that's just a change in the operational way that works.
And the board were really conscious to see that business case between, you either pay somebody a lease fee or an annual fee, or you insource it, and the business case was neutral. So for us, we're slightly in favor of bringing it back in-house. So from a board perspective, that slight stronger element of control was quite attractive.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Mr. Armstrong.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I noted amongst all of the uncertainty that the question of funding is not resolved. Do you have an expectation on how long those discussions with BNZ will last, and when will you have certainty around that bank funding?
Technology challenged. We've got certainty around the existing facility, which gives us a few million headroom. We're obviously going to have to get covenant relief based on that chart. They've been very supportive. 12 months, I would say. We're going to have to do some structural changes to that debt funding within the next 12 months, and that's why we're hoping that the conservative case becomes mild and better than mild in the coming period. So, to be frank, we can breathe for 12 months. We've got a very supportive lender, but we'll need to make some structural changes within that 12-month window.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Sorry, just to follow up on that, you did, John, make a comment about other airports looking to their shareholders for relief, which did cause me to have a fear that you might be softening us up for that. So is that an option? Is that something you're considering, coming to the council to look for relief?
I guess I was just really reflecting what I'd seen in the paper from New Plymouth and a few others. No deliberate thought of softening it up, but in today's world, I'm just being as frank as possible as saying we can breathe for a period. There is so much uncertainty, and I get disappointed. I call it the mist of COVID because we can all sort of weave in and out of that, but we're trying to be as factual as possible. Say, hey, look, we've got 12 months breathing space. I wouldn't totally disregard that. I'd be disingenuous if I did, but as we sit here now, we're comfortable where we're at, but the future is still the future, and there is still a lot of uncertainty, but we're comfortable where we're at now. But like I said, I don't know what that's going to look like in the future, to be honest.
Okay, thank you for that frank response.
Okay. Thank you. Councillors, are there any final questions? There been none. Back to you, Steve.
Yeah, councillors, I just thought I'd conclude here by the presentation, if you like, by saying a couple of things in terms of the process from here. Normally at this stage, this is the point where we've been reported back with the final SOI, but what we've in fact got in front of us is an updated one, if you like, which is still the updated draft. Now, assuming you, apart from that one change to the net promoter score that was proposed, David and I have had a talk about the process moving forward, and it's our hope to be able to make sure that we have an approved SOI before the end of June, and that assuming you adopted the recommendations that we've made here, apart from perhaps making it possible that it would be October rather than September that the report, perhaps we can just have that a bit flexible, then we would look to engage, and if the board wished to make no other changes other than, in other words, ratify it as it stands, then I can report that to you at the council meeting next week, and we can shortcut the process, if you like, and not have them have to come back again with the final version of the SOI, if you like. Okay. So that's what's proposed.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve. That sounds sensible. So no further. So thank you very much, gentlemen. You can step down. So we will now move to the recommendations, and I'm happy to change the September to October. So I'm happy to move the 3 recommendations, and you'll just note on the third one that we've changed the last from practical to financially prudent. So I have a mover. Thank you, Councillor Rutherford and Councillor Naylor. So I'll now open up for comment. You're the mover, Councillor Rutherford. Did you want to speak first? So anyone? Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the Airport Management Board for giving us an update. And I think it was really needed. We're unsure, and I sense that you are to a certain extent of where things are totally heading with some surety. And I think the recommendations there are prudent. And coming back in October gives us us all some surety of what the market is doing. I just want to comment that we are better placed than most, and I think this, although it is sobering news, it's actually better than I expected. To have, I think it was 37 flights a week, with more to come on board, or actually 41, I think, if you include Nelson. Have you got that, Janine? 41 flights a week in and out of our regional port. It is good. It is good news. And I think the diversification which Councillor Barrett spoke about or asked about with the freight, and I do understand that those freight flights were coming in, jet freight flights were coming in each night and continue to, really has helped with that diversification. We've escaped the Airways knife, and our colleagues in New Plymouth, Hamilton and Hawke's Bay didn't, so who are comparable airports, so that is promising. And they're continuing with essential infrastructure upgrades. So we're as well placed as we can be, councillors, and I think it is good signs. We need to move on with some of the other capital projects, but we only can really do that with a little bit more surety, and the board's stressed that as well. So thank you for your update.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just to get it right, it's 60 flights if you include Christchurch with 19. So got to get those figures right.
The media's got that.
Okay. Councillor Ruapehu.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I just want to comment on the Ruapehu Business Park. It is nice to have, and it is good to have that for diversification, but we need to have it for the right reasons, because it is a cherry, and it is to make sure that we've got it there for the right reasons, and they do have to still attract people to the park. If we haven't got people that are willing to go into the park, then we've got issues. So I do say it with caution. It is attracting people into that park that are businesses that want to go into it. And if we're in an environment that are people that don't want to go into that park, then we've got issues. So it is still business opportunities, and if people don't want to be going in there, then we still may have issues. So I still say that with caution. It is something that it's a cherry on the top, and we're not quite there yet. So the Ruapehu Business Park is nice to have, and it'd be good to see it flourishing, but it's not there yet. So I just say that with caution.
Okay, thank you, councillors. And I'd just like to say thank you, General, for your presentation and being honest. I think it was a good, open, honest presentation. And obviously we've got a long road to hoe yet, but with caution, I think we're in a good position. So thank you.
I just need to make a change because we've moved this to October. We're going to remove the phrase of that annual report because that will still come in.
Yep, okay. Just to change the recommendation, we're just going to remove the to item number 2. We've put October in, but we're still going to have the annual report presentation for September. So we'll just alter that to reflect that. Is everybody happy that we take the 3 recommendations together, and we'll do it by voices? So we'll just get that change in there. So, right, thank you. So all those in favour? Aye. Anyone against? So that is carried. Thank you. So we'll now move on to our next item, which is item number 7, fees and charges. And Steve, you're in the hot seat again. And that's on page 35.
Yes, councillors, really, I propose that this report just be taken as read. It's basically just recommending that the fees and charges that came to you in March be approved in the form that they came to you at that time. Okay. You've had the one submission and that's attached to the report.
Okay, thank you, Steve. I have a question around the fees and charges on page 39, which is one of the report. There's significant increase in the charges on the resource consents, and there's no qualification as to why those charges have gone up so significantly. Is it something we've changed or?
If it may please you, I'll answer that question. What we did for each of the charging levels is we averaged the last 12 months for each of those types of consents. And so that came out at higher than the current deposit and fixed fee rate. And so that's the reason for the increase. So it's just mirroring the average for each of those consent types for the last 12 months.
So have we got this significantly wrong last year? Like it's like some of these fees are like 30% increase.
I think one of the things that's slightly confusing is the terminology. It's got a fixed fee shown there, and the fixed fee has a particular it's a particular term that doesn't mean that that's the only charge. We're really charging at an hourly rate for these things, and we have a deposit. In some cases, we're charging what we term a fixed fee, but it in fact represents the amount of time. And if there's more time taken than that, you actually charge more than that. So what Simon has recommended is that the sum that we call the fixed fee in this charge schedule is more like the sum that's actually charged in the end each time. It's not as if we're increasing the amount that we're expecting people to pay overall.
Okay, so what you're saying is the total value of the job has not increased by 30%, it's just the upfront.
That's right, it's the way we're expressing it in terms of this chart of charges.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Steve. Just a question on page 43, just near the middle of the page there, the noise offenses, and noting that previously we sort of had a bit of a three-step program there where there was a bit more pain on the second step and then a bit more pain on the third step. And looking at the proposal, it jumps up now on the second step, but then there's no sort of further third step. Was there consideration given to a third step there?
The staff in that area, there was a bit of discussion of it at the committee meeting back in March when that issue was raised and talked about. My understanding is that the desire is to move away from having that middle step and that it would effectively become the second and subsequent offences were at the higher level. They need to be able to have this level of charge to represent what's involved in being I suppose, a problem area where people that are repeat offenders, and the approach being taken here is one that they believe is necessary in order to be effective.
Okay. We'll just get Chris to comment on remote. So over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, look, Steve's right. So the team have recommended to make this change, and look, a bit of the background to it is that the vast majority of people only get their equipment seized once. So in most cases, it's only the first one that's ever used. And then in a small number of cases, you have some recidivist offenders that sort of are causing significant problems to their neighbours. So the feeling from the team is that in terms of trying to address those ones, you better to sort of hit them hard on the second time, and then leave it at that level. So the new level of 414 is just the increase on the fourth and subsequent, and they feel that that's going to be a better way of addressing the problems that we have, and also, recognising that the people who are doing these second and subsequent offences are causing significant distress to their neighbours.
Thank you, Chris, for that answer. Through you, Madam Chair, if I might further clarify that, probably still with the general manager. I guess for the true recidivists in the community, what is our final recourse beyond just continuing to hit them with a $414 fine?
That's a good question. Look, I'm not sure exactly what happens. My understanding is that after people get hit with the fines, that they do tend to modify eventually. But look, I think the police get involved at that stage.
All right, thank you. I'll leave it there, Madam Chair.
Councillor Nay.
Thank you. Just following on from the Chair's questions about Appendix B on page 39. So you described that this reflected an average and that, sometimes the hourly rate means that it is more. If the hourly rate actually means that it's less than that fixed charge, are people charged less, or are they charged, is the fixed charge a minimum?
So they pay the deposit, and then however long it takes the officers, if there's an additional charge, we charge that. And if they haven't met, or if there is a refund, then we simply refund it.
So given that, is fixed charge the right way of describing that fee? Or is it is it more of an estimate?
The fixed charge term comes from the RMA, and so it's an average of the cost for that type of consent. We can charge additional charges on top of that, but we have advertised the fixed charge, so you cannot object to any fee up to that amount. If it's over that amount, an additional charge, you can object to it.
Okay, thank you, that's helpful.
Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is about charging this hourly rate by the council officers when they visit a certain place or certain business. Sometimes they do take a new officer or officer under training, and they charge a certain rate for that trainee or the additional person as well. Should it be really applied to the business or put them? It's not their fault that you are training an officer. So why should they pay for that additional charge?
So what we do with each of those situations is apply, I suppose, a fair and reasonable test. So our senior planners will review each of the consents, look at how many hours have been spent by the graduate planner or the planning officer. If we consider that it's way over and above what would be fair and reasonable, then we don't charge all of those hours. We would take some hours off. So that's a discretionary decision that is made with each of those consents.
Not sure what to say. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Steve. Steve, all of these schedules of fees and charges were brought to us in March, weren't they, for discussion and questions at that point. Have any of them changed since then?
Not on this schedule, no. This is exactly as was presented in March.
So we've seen this once already in March and
yes.
Had an opportunity then to discuss
These are
it.
the ones that we had to consider them in March, put them out for public consultation, consider the feedback, and now this is endorsing them if you propose in exactly the same form as what I'm suggesting.
So this is really quite a procedural piece of work. Thank you.
Any further questions, Councillor? I'll remind Councillor Johnson that they did go out for consultation, so there may be something that we want to discuss on them after they've been out for consultation, so it's just a bit more than procedural. Also, I'd just like to comment too that the one person that was a submitter did have an opportunity several times to speak to us, so he didn't take that up. So there's no further questions. So thank you, gentlemen. You may step down. I'm happy to move the recommendations. Councillor Rutherford. This is straightforward, so I'm not expecting any great comments, but if Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I can ask item 2 or the recommendation 2 be separated, because I'm going to oppose it in regards to stimulating growth and development and all the other things that we're needing to do. It's around the consenting issue in many cases. And so my view is that I just want to moderate it, hold it for a year. Those hourly rates are high already. And those inspections, again, I think it's another impact on business that we're trying to pass on when we've looked at holding back rates and trying to support businesses. And so therefore, those fees and charges I'm wanting to hold for another year. The trade waste I'm more comfortable with because the cost for wastewater are so significant and our future investment's huge. And so therefore, I think that's a fair increase. But for the other fixed charges, I really have difficulty supporting this year. Typically I would, but we're under unusual circumstances. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I hadn't expected to need to comment, but was recently prompted by my colleague, Councillor Dennison. I find it rather surprising and sort of opportunistic, having had some quite comprehensive debates about the budget, which we've already considered and now approved, that at this stage we are suddenly deciding to revisit one of the components of that budget, which is revenue associated with fees and charges. And I'm very much of the view that we should be proceeding as budgeted, which includes fees and charges.
Thank you, Councillor. And I'll just get the CFO to comment on the impact if you decide to vote against that.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Councillor Barrett, who's stolen some of my thunder, but is quite right. I think if Councillor Dennison's proposal succeeds and nobody votes for option 2, there's 2 things to consider. One is we still need a vote to set some fees and charges revenue. And so therefore we would then need you to vote for an amendment that sets the fees and charges, and I'm assuming Vaughan's talking about keeping them the same as last year. We'd need that to be passed in order to set fees and revenue generally. And the second point being the budget. We have budgeted, this will have budget implications on us. And I'm not exactly sure how to deal with that right now, because I'm really, I guess, a little bit reluctant to change the budget, but just make you aware that that will have negative implications on our ability to achieve budget.
Okay, thank you. We'll just go. Any other comments? No. So we're just going to go forward with the voting. So we will go with item number 2 first. Yes, I was going to say that. So we will have a division. Over to you, Hannah.
On item number 2, Councillor Finlay. 4. Mr. Armstrong. 4. Councillor Butt. 4. Councillor Johnson.
4.
4. Councillor Dennison. Against. Councillor Beattie.
4.
4. Councillor Rutherford. 4. Councillor Meehan. 4. Councillor Bowen. 4. Councillor Barrett.
4.
4. Councillor Naylor.
4.
4. Mayor Smith.
4.
4. Councillor Dingwall.
4.
4. Councillor Petrinas. 4. Councillor Harpeter.
4.
4. Councillor Hancock. 4.
Thank you, Hannah. So 15 for 1 against. Okay. So that is carried 15 votes for and 1 against. So we'll now move on to the other 2 recommendations, 1 and 3, and I propose to take those via the voices. So all those in favour?
Aye.
Anyone against? So that is carried. So we'll now move on to our next item, which is item number 8, the public rental housing within Council's Whakaronga subdivision, which is on page 49. And we have Bryce, who is going to present that, and David Murphy. Thank you. That's right.
Good morning, councillors. Happy to take the report as read, but a couple of sort of additional considerations and comments for you. So most of, I guess, what we've sort of tried to align, not just more than just the financial side of things, but we've also tried to give you a little bit of food for thought, if you will, around sort of the general strategy of council and where the building of housing sits. And David will talk a little bit more about that in terms of the current social housing plan and some of that strategic direction. But a couple of additional considerations. We do have a couple of future property development opportunities that we would be considering in the next few years. So if council does not get involved in building housing on this subdivision specifically, there will be further opportunities in the future that could be considered. One of the points in the additional considerations section talks around local amenities, things like supermarkets, bus routes, and things along those lines. Some of the future developments might be a bit more suitable from that point of view. The current direction was around public housing, which is setting things at a public, I guess, or a market rate, if you will, from a rental point of view. However, if in the future that direction ever changed and there was a desire to turn them into social housing, that's where some of those amenities in particular could come into consideration. And I guess until they are resolved in terms of Whakaronga as a growth area, that's definitely something worth considering. And I guess the last consideration I would add to that is this is the first property development exercise we have gone through. So some of the costs and things like that are not 100% confirmed in terms of exact project cost, revenues, sections, what they might sell for. However, there is a report update in August to the Infrastructure Committee on the Whakaronga subdivision specifically, so we should have a much more accurate picture of what those will be for that paper. But from an indicative point of view, we have talked to a number of different sources in the market, for the costs for actually what it costs to build a house. We have gone and spoken to actual building companies. We have spoken to property management companies in terms of what it costs and what kind of provisions you should be looking for from a property management point of view. And then obviously internally for things like development contributions and rates implications and things like that, we have the internal resource to be doing that. So while we have tried to be as accurate as possible, there are a couple of other considerations, and perhaps, as I said, there are future developments as well. So if this was an opportunity that didn't proceed, it's not to say this couldn't be something that could be considered in the future. David, do you want to talk around the strategic side?
Thanks, Bryce. So obviously your request was to receive financial modelling, and I'm not going to talk about that, but I'm just going to make a couple of points in anticipation of a discussion about next steps in terms of what the council may do, having received this information. So a couple of key points from me is obviously market public housing is not social housing. I think that's relatively well understood by councillors. I guess the other point I'd really like to make is for the council to think really hard about why they may want to do this in terms of building public housing for rental. So presumably there's an understanding that there's a shortage of rental properties. I would sort of make the point that the shortage of rental properties is reflected in the fact that there's actually a shortage of housing per se. The reason there's a shortage in housing per se is really because there's a shortage of land. So So when we're thinking, I guess, as a council about how we address a shortage of rental properties, if that's the problem we're looking to solve, we should actually think about that there's actually a shortage of houses, which is driven by a shortage of land. So if we want to address the housing shortfall, one of the best things we could do is address the supply of land, which would mean focusing on releasing sections, selling those to the market or to particular people, and then getting on and buying some more land and doing some more subdivision. So that's just something to think about in terms of the conversation about next steps.
Thank you. I'll open for questions. First up, Bryce, when I asked for a financial model, there's no cash flows or anything in this paper, and I was to make a decision.
In terms of what, rental?
Yeah. There's nothing in here about, for instance, there is an error in the paper because we asked for a scattered approach, and you've mentioned in here that all the houses would be in the first stage. So there's no, I sort of expected to see a page with how it would affect our 10-year plan, where money would be required, when we would be borrowing money, what interest rates we'd be looking at to see how actual financial it was.
So there's a couple of points in that. In terms of the scattering, in terms of how we're going to be delivering the Whakarongo subdivision, I mean, there is essentially 2 stages. One is about 2/3 of the subdivision, which is the first sort of 79 sections out of 115. And the balance will be delivered once we're able to get a sort of global consent for the Whakarongo growth area in terms of stormwater, which is part of the reason why that's been split like that. However, I guess taking that sort of pepper potting scattering approach, we have made a critical assumption that out of those sort of 79, 80 sections, we would be doing exactly that, as opposed to taking more of a Papioia type approach where we're actually looking to lump them all together and building a couple of complexes. In terms of the modelling, in terms of rental, I have made some commentary in the report around, I guess, expected rental returns, which I have tried to talk through specifically in terms of clause 3.10 and 3.12, which is actually, I guess, talked more from an annual point of view. No, didn't go through the, I guess, planning it out over a 10-year period, but did, I guess, at this stage for the point of talking about feasibility and viability of doing something like this, tried to provide as much information as we could from a, I guess, year-by-year basis. Over a 10-year period, yes, they would be subject to rent increases and things like that, so some of that revenue may go up, but a lot of that is also dictated by the market and the supply and demand factors and things like that. So it can be a little bit, I guess, difficult to model exactly what rentals might be doing in 6-7 years' time, and whether they would have gone up and by how much.
Thank you, you've answered that, I'll come back to it. And just with your comments, have you taken this that we would take 30 sections out of the first 79?
26 sections was the assumption,
It was 20, yeah.
which is 30%, and yes, out of the first
So it's not
stage.
out of the 115?
Well, it will be when the subdivision is completed,
okay,
but
so,
yes, we were
so they could be staged at a later date?
They could be.
Yep, okay, thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Bryce and David. So just a question around some of the assumptions, I suppose, that were made that you've referred to in the report. So my understanding, and certainly my intention when we put this up, was retaining 1/3 of sections would apply to the whole subdivision. In other words, 1/3 of 115, which would be 38 sections. So can you tell me how it is that you got to the assumption that it would only be 1/3 of the first stage?
I can speak to this because it's probably my doing, to be fair. Because when we were talking about this in the committee meeting way back in February or March, if I recall. The presentation was on the Whakaronga subdivision generally, and it was very focused on being in 2 stages, and perhaps a lack of clarity and a lack of understanding around what was being requested. But I read the request to be 1/3 of the houses in the first stage, which is why the reports come back at that level.
Okay, well, that explains that. Thank you. And then also, in the assumptions in 3.1, it talks about the additional rental properties needing to be managed, and therefore council would need to increase its staffing resources to manage an additional 26 houses. Can you just tell me what staffing we've got at the moment? Because we've got just over 400 houses or units, haven't we?
Correct.
And how many staff have we got to manage those properties?
There's currently 2 in that team, plus a team leader or a manager. Although with Jason McDowell's appointment to the risk manager role, I understand that sort of he's a bit of a transition phase, and eventually we would be looking to replace that. So there would be 3. Whether that model and that role would stay as a pure leader, or whether they would also get involved in managing some properties, I'm unsure at this stage. The intention of flagging that was more around, when we look at things like Papioia, we're also increasing, our housing stock by a considerable rate. If we then increased it by more and more in order to give a quality level of service to all of these tenants, that comes with a staffing provision. Otherwise, we just end up spreading the load quite wide.
Okay. And then in terms of the ongoing maintenance, a 30% allowance for a new build, is that a standard allowance?
So that was in consultation with 2 property management companies in the private market. That's the advice that they're giving private landlords in these kind of situations. If it was older stock, as I mentioned in the report as well, it's probably more sort of 40% plus. But given they are new builds, obviously in the first couple of years, you wouldn't be expecting a heck of a lot of maintenance. But obviously as time goes on, then that does become more and more of a factor.
Okay. I mean, obviously I'm not an experienced private sector landlord, but it seemed quite high.
Councillor Johnson, can I just follow on from that question? Because I got a bit confused with that too. So the 30%, what are you including in that?
So that's basically including everything from, I guess from a rates provision right through to be maintenance, through to all of those kind of considerations that we need to be doing. Yep, all of those kind of things.
No interest or anything like that?
No, not at all. It was excluding interest, and it was excluding property management fees. If we were in the private market, you would also engage someone over and above that, which is why I separated that cost out. But basically it's a provision for all of those other costs that would be associated with running a property.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. So do we have that kind of cost put aside for the maintenance of our current units?
It actually works out to be considerably less than that. But this is also, I guess, from a maintenance point of view, one area that we also overspend in quite regularly. It's very reactive, but there is also significant parallels. It is social housing, so we are having to hold back a lot more money, I suppose, for reactive maintenance than you might need to if we were in a private market. But yes, we do try and obviously hold back a certain percentage of things to be looking after the maintenance. But if you're asking me exactly, is it 30%? No, it's actually under budgeted, and it's a lot less than that.
Okay. Well, that might be some questions for another day, but I'll try and keep focused on this. So there's no, that I could see here, there's no discussion of increase in the value of the asset over the time it would take us to repay it. So there's a figure of 11 to 15 years to repay, but there's no discussion anywhere about a capital gain that would occur in that time. Have you been able to do any estimates of that?
I didn't, no. That is a consideration. Obviously, it is very heavily dictated on market considerations. We would be relying on builders to do this. That market does have a certain amount of pressure. So the reality is we might not be able to get a builder to the site for another 2 years, potentially, before they even started building these houses, unless we were able to secure a deal over and above that. And things can change a lot of time between now and in 2 years' time. So I guess that is just another consideration, but it does become quite difficult to be forecasting in the current market of what's happening in 2-3 years' time and onwards.
Okay, I'll just leave it there for now. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, gentlemen, for your report. Councillor Johnson's asked my questions around the maintenance, so I won't go there. So, David, to you, just about the supply and demand. Obviously, in the 90s and early 2000s, there was a lot of rental type properties built, and you commented that it's not actually the housing, it's the land issue. So we're getting a lot of houses built. In fact, I go around regularly saying that our consents have increased quite dramatically, and we've got the figures there to back that up. So just who will build these rentals if the current model is not doing that?
Well, I guess my comment was made that, you know, rental properties are houses, and typically if you increase the supply of houses, regardless of who's building them and whether they're homes to buy or homes to rent, if we increase the supply of houses, then there will typically be more rental properties. So I guess the pressure on the rental market is coming from a shortage of houses. So if you want to address I guess my comments were, I think if the council, in relation to, I guess I'm just encouraging the council to think hard about why you might want to invest in rental properties versus the way in which you could address the broader housing supply issue with the assets that we have. So we have a piece of land. We know we've got a small number of greenfield landowners who drip feed sections to the market at a certain rate. So if we want to increase the supply of all houses and use our assets as best as possible, then I'm suggesting the council thinks hard about whether it just focuses on releasing sections to the market or selling to particular property owners, because there is no shortage of people who want to build houses. There's a shortage of people who have land that can deliver land to the market. So if we were to deliver sections to the market, take the profit, buy some more land and release some more sections, what we would be addressing quickly is the housing supply issue, because we'd be supplying more land.
Could I just challenge you there? The cookie cutter model, and you know this, is the 3-4 bedroom, 2 garages. I'm not going to mention companies, but it's the group build. There's nobody building specific rentals. So I ask you again, who's going to build them if we just supply more land?
Yeah, I guess I'd challenge that a little bit to say that if you increase the overall supply, then there's going to be more houses for people to buy, so the existing stock will be more available for rental properties. So when we didn't have a housing shortage, we didn't have a rental supply shortage. So if you can address the housing shortage, then naturally you would address the rental shortage. And I'm not saying there's I guess I'm just suggesting the council thinks really hard about what its motivations are for investing in this versus what the broader issue is, because we know that if you increase supply, then the issue around supply is land.
Yeah, okay, I'll leave it to comments because.
Thank you.
Thanks, David.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Bryce. Thanks, David. Just a couple areas that I wanted to raise questions on. The first one is to, I guess, better understand your comments, David, around land availability. And it seems to me pinning a housing shortage and our challenges in dealing with population growth on land availability is sort of a greenfield sprawl sort of, and just wanted to understand, are we backing away from urban density and building in and building up, or is that not also a viable option?
No, it's definitely a viable option, and it should be. So all land, regardless of where it is, will assist with the supply. And I think Bryce made the point early in his presentation that if the council was to consider building houses, either for sale or for rental, then they may want to think about the Huia Street, the depot site, the Summer Haze, because that provides an opportunity to deliver different types of houses that the market isn't currently delivering. It's unlikely you would build the same sort of houses you would at Whakaronga as what you would at Huia Street, the depot, or Summer Haze. So if the council, so there's a typology issue and a location issue and a broader supply issue. So Whakaronga, given that it is a greenfield area, typically is going to, be your more traditional type of housing. That's, there's an opportunity to build smaller houses than have been delivered, but the council has a range of opportunities over and above Whakaronga. But Whakaronga being a greenfield area, if greenfield supply is part of our overall package for housing, and we want to increase the overall supply of housing, then getting those sections to the market, letting other people build the homes, and then buying the next block and developing more sections will increase the overall supply. And then if we want to focus on building some houses, as I said, look at those sites where you can, because I would say if you're going to deliver a different type of house, you're much better deliver that different type of house in those sites that I mentioned, as opposed to Whakaronga.
Cool, thank you for that, I guess painting that wider picture for us and reminding us of that. The other question that I had was just around the potential for turning our mind as a council to this energy efficiency and environmental efficiency of any houses that we might commission here at Whakaronga, and just recalling that in Papuea Place, for instance, there was quite a discussion around where the line should be on that. So we'll be interested, no doubt, at some point in getting information to this table about options there. So can you give us some advice on what an appropriate timing might be to seek that information and how we might proceed in that regard?
That information can get obtained from, probably from the couple of sources we used in terms of builders who provided some of that advice around costs of that. They also provide a number of costings and recommendations around those kind of features, but that could be relatively easy to obtain. Maybe August, September would be an appropriate time to be providing that information.
Thank you. So given recommendation 2 already indicates some information coming back in August, would you have a comfort from an officer's point of view of additionally having an initial look at energy and environmental efficiency of housing options?
Yes, it's definitely something we can be considering as part of what the actual houses may look like, what are the kind of design materials we use, and all of those things like energy efficiency and sustainability definitely should be considered and could be.
Great, thank you. Madam Chair.
Councillor Barr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, just to follow up on some of the questions that have come forward. I think, the Mayor alluded to the type of house that would normally go into that kind of greenfield subdivision, and recognising in your report you talk about rental houses, the gap there being in 2 to 3 bedrooms, which is not what we're seeing being built in that kind of greenfield subdivision. And then in your report at 2.5, you talk about the section size, that sections will be of a variety of sizes. Are we able to control that? Because I noted later on you said this is an indicative plan, this could change through resource consent. Obviously, section size is a driver of the size of house that goes on it.
So as part of the general strategy, so parking the idea of doing public housing, one thing we are looking at doing as part of the process of actually releasing these sections to the market for sale is actually engaging a couple of these building companies to be providing some some smart options and design things for some of the smaller sections as well. People don't know what they don't know, and we don't have a heck of a lot of those sections of that kind of sizing around the city. And there has been a bit of a trend in the past where you shove the same size house on a small section and then literally you look out your window and the fence is right there. There is actually some smarter way of doing things and some other options that could be done. So as part of that strategy to, I guess, make those smaller sections as marketable as possible, we were going to be providing some of those kind of design options. The people who buy them are not going to be forced to be using those builders, but it is going to be, from a sales strategy point of view, hopefully assisting with that around some quite smart, funky designs on what you can do on some smaller sections and actually get a better outcome.
I appreciate the intention, Bryce, but we've not had a lot of success in convincing anybody, have we?
So just to add to that, the average lot size in Whakaronga and the district plan is smaller than what we've seen in the typical Kelvin Grove area. And previously we had a minimum lot size of sort of 700 square metres, I think it was, in the traditional Kelvin Grove area. So what we've said in Whakaronga is the average lot size should be 500 to 550. So it's a little bit hard to see in the plan, but there are lots below 500 and there are some larger ones. So that what an average lot size does is provide the developer, in this case the council, the ability to provide some larger sections for a family, but also provide some lots at 350 or 400 square metres, which are typically likely to see a smaller dwelling. I think the other thing and I guess a lot of this is this was a financial modelling report, but we anticipated the discussion going elsewhere. Who the council sells to, if it chooses to sell, will also dictate the types of houses that are built. So if we sell to Kāinga Ora, if we sell to Homes for People, we know the Alliance for the Gorge, Te Aroturanga, are looking for homes. We know Defence are looking for homes. So if there are no, as I said earlier, there are no shortage of people who want to build homes. What they don't have is land. So we can sell to people who we know will build and they won't flip it, for want of a better term. So there are other mechanisms for getting the outcomes that we're looking for other than building the homes ourselves.
Thank you. And that links nicely to my other question, which was about those potential partnerships. How would council go about exploring partnerships with, say, Te Aroturanga?
The first step is simply through discussion and understanding. We have a good understanding in many cases. We have some ongoing dialogue with various areas of council, David's and mine included, in that. But yeah, getting an idea of exactly what they were after and beginning that general broad discussion, I suppose. So rather than taking anything off the table, exploring how we can be working together is always the best start to that. It could be ring fencing a couple of sections to be selling to the different organisations and doing it that way. The original intention from Whakaronga was to be releasing sections to the mum and dads, essentially, rather than just all to one or two big group builders. So that could still be preserved while still going to some of these organisations.
Okay. That's interesting. Thank you. Nothing more.
At this point, the conversation shifted from council ownership and rental to partnerships, and I want to declare a conflict of interest to remove myself being involved with Homes for People. Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Question's been answered. Councillor Finlay.
Thank you. I've got 4 questions here. Some have partly been answered, but when do you think, firstly, when do you think these sections will be available to the public?
So the intention is to be beginning the pre-sale process towards the end of the year.
This year?
Yep, currently. So September, we were looking to have awarded a contractor and beginning to turn dirt, for lack of a better way of putting it, and beginning that sort of process. And once we've gotten to that stage, we've got the detailed designs and we're at there. The next logical step is to beginning this pre-sale process. And then once the sections are coming available and it's appropriate for people to be, I guess, beginning their individual construction on those sites, and that can happen in due course.
Okay.
2.11 of your report.
Now, you've talked about groups and everything else, getting like the fence and everything else, getting bits of land. The mum and dad or the first homeowner who wants a bit of land, at what stage and how can they start to register an interest in a section? Because there's going to be a huge interest in this.
I probably am currently getting inquiries every sort of second week from people.
Right.
We are attaining a bit of a list around that for a number of people who jumped on, I guess, in the first sort of media release around this process. I've basically asked them, deferred them to sort of more of a sort of August, September type conversation, as we just simply weren't in much of a position to have much of an educated conversation. As we're getting closer and closer to development time, we're able to have more of these kind of conversations, but they can definitely start registering their interest. For some of these people, they had an immediate need that maybe they've moved on and bought another section somewhere else. But in other cases, we're going to be having quite a robust sort of marketing strategy where people can be definitely getting involved. And from all walks of life, and whether they be a partnership or whether they be a mum and dad, they will have an equal bite of the cherry.
Okay, thank you. And the other last question is, the lower part of Kelvin Grove there, because of the rules that they can't put relocables on there. Now, in this area here, Wakaronga, are relocatable houses going to be allowed, or have we discussed that? Because relocatables are not necessarily existing houses. They can be
Excuse me,
built.
Councillor, we keep on track of what the purpose of this meeting is, and if you could take that offline or bring it back to the next meeting when you, where we'll be specifically talking about those Whakaronga sections that go on sale.
Really?
Yes, really.
All right, I'll take.
Okay, and I'm actually going to adjourn the meeting now for a 15-minute break because it's 11:15. So if people can come back to 11 o'clock. Thank you.
Yes, in respect to land, is that there are, as we know, there are a few developers in Palmerston North, and that hold the greenfield. So it's about 3 landowners that hold all the greenfield land. So part of the issue is we can zone as much land as we like and demonstrate that we're meeting the NPS requirement. But if all that land is held in particular owners who drip feed the sections, then it doesn't matter how much land you've got rezoned. So I guess one of the strategic opportunities the council has with the Whakaronga block is it can agitate the market, for want of a better term, by providing more land quicker than what the typical developers are.
Okay, so just to be clear, we've met our requirements under the NPS to zone the land, and the bottleneck is in then the release of that zoned land to market. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Hape.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks for your report, Bryce and David. Just looking at 2.17, where you're saying the mid-range point per section is around 425 per metre squared. I'm just wondering about your market research in Kelvin Grove and wondering about how much research you've done on what the market wants for a section size. Just having built in Kelvin Grove myself and having lived in Kelvin Grove, what is the market demand for what people want to actually build on? And I just want to know what kind of market research you've done for that suburb.
So the pricing was directly provided from a number of real estate agents, and also based on actual sales data in the area, primarily in Kelvin Grove as opposed to Whakaronga itself, but in the general sort of area. So that is just based on pure sales data, to be honest. In terms of I guess desirability of section sizes and things like that, and what people are looking for. We start to move into a bit more of a sort of holistical conversation, through a number of conversations over time. I'm sort of having these kind of conversations with a number of people all the time, and we do, I have personally been given a number of, I guess, comments to myself around people looking for smaller sections, people having the opportunity from maybe not a first home buyer necessarily, but people who maybe for their first build and things like that, they simply, if they've got a 700, 800 square metre section, then you're looking to build a house on top of that. It's just simply pricing them out of the market. So one way to, I guess, bring that back in line and give some of these people that opportunity is to be building smaller sections, because naturally it is cheaper because it's smaller. However, I guess there is a certain balance we're trying to provide here as well around, we're talking affordable sections is something that gets sort of used a lot but a pretty loose term. While, as David said, the key is really to be bringing sections to the market and giving people those options. One thing we don't want to do is to price them in a way that actually starts to have quite a detrimental effect on everyone else by bringing the average square metre rate down. So, we could have the opportunity to come in and sell sections at $120,000, but obviously that does start to have quite an impact on everyone else looking to do things, which is not really the outcome we're looking for. Hence the variety of sizings of sections that do, I guess that is one way to be helping to provide that variety and open up that market.
So the section sizes between 300 and 500.
I think the biggest one is 700, I believe. But yep. So they're going right down to that sort of 3 to 350 stage. And that's where an earlier question was around, some of the design options and things like that. And that's when my comments come back to, even for some of these small sections, there are some quite sort of cool, funky designs you can be doing on those kind of sections. And as part of our marketing strategy is being able to provide some ideas and things like that to those kind of people who are looking to buy those around some of the options. So they're not just literally putting a 300 square metre house on a 350 square metre section.
Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Dingwall.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Bryce and David, for this report. One question, I guess, I've got a couple of questions. So one of them is around what council is already doing. So I think 4.8, which is on page 57 of our report, you said that providing unsubsidised public rental housing is in direct competition to the private rental market. Are we already doing that? Like, how do we already own houses that are currently rented out at market value?
Well, yes, we do. Our current social housing plan is focused on, and I sort of detailed some of that from 4.9 in particular, but it is focusing on social housing, not public housing. However, we do still have some houses in our portfolio that are at market rates, but in terms of actively building public houses, we're not doing that currently.
Yes. So we haven't currently built any new ones, but we are already a landlord for people in rental houses at the moment.
Correct, but it is a minority of the portfolio. That remains, and as they come available, I believe the general strategy is to be converting them into social housing at that stage. But rather than as a strategy displacing people out of homes, we're waiting as they come vacant. So if we've got 100 people out of 400 houses, 100 houses out of 400, I don't even think it's that, but if we had that was currently at market rate, as one of them came vacant, as someone moved on to another opportunity, at that stage it would convert into a social house, I suppose, and be given to a subsidised.
Excuse me, Bruce, just to get clarification on that. I know that council moved to make, we had 100 public housing, we moved to make 20 of them social houses, and the balance of the 80 remain in public housing. So I'm unaware, and I'd like clarification, there's no policy that we're converting the balance of those to social housing because that has budget implications. So I'd like to make sure that we have this information corrected, please.
Jason, perhaps you might be more better placed to talk about that. Sorry to put you on the spot.
That's okay, we can come back to that question. Yep, so Councillor Dingwall, we'll come back to that answer if there's anything else you want to ask.
Okay, and so I guess my other question on was around 4.6, looking at government agencies such as Kaingaora. What success have we had over the last, 10 years of partnering with, or of, I guess, government agencies building property in Palmerston North?
I think it's probably fair to say the last, I guess we're close to the end of this term of the current government, but the previous government wasn't that keen on building state houses or social houses. So Kaingaora is still in a kind of its infancy to a certain extent, but the conversations we are having with them is that they're very keen to partner with council to look to get land in different parts of the city to distribute either first build Kiwi build homes or potentially social housing.
So just following on from that, if we had decided not to do things like the Papaoea project and be landlords at market rates, the work that we've already been doing that Palmy is so proud of achieving over this time, if we had just left it to central government, what would our housing situation be like now?
I guess a difficult question to answer. I mean, they do have a waiting list, as do we, for people looking to get into social housing. That is a fact, but what the market might look like in that case, I can't comment to that.
Okay, thanks. I'll leave it there, aside from
okay.
The other
Thank
question.
you, Councillor. Jason, are you ready to answer this? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, councillors. So with our portfolio, we have 414 properties. There is approximately 100 of those units that are on our unsubsidised proportion, which has eligibility criteria, which was set by council with the last plan back in 2018. So for anybody to go onto that waiting list, there is a social area of that, such as needing to have a community services card and the criteria to go into those particular housing. How that works is if they meet those criteria, particularly around the eligibility. So if they are on a community services card, they have a low income and they have experienced barriers to renting in the private market, they are eligible for those particular housing, which is a criteria that council provided. So I guess part of this proposal is if it was to meet those particular needs, they would fall into that sector. If it was to meet different needs of the market, so for example, if myself was eligible if it was decided that it was to meet eligibility, like for myself to rent one of the properties, we'd need a policy change and new criteria and also changes to the social housing plan to meet those desires of council.
Okay. Thank you, Jason.
Does that answer?
Yeah, so just to clarify, we have around about 80 or 100 properties that we charge market rent for.
That's correct.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson might want to follow up.
I'm very sorry to interrupt, Madam Chair, but if I might just ask Jason to clarify this issue just a bit further.
Yep. You can.
So, Jason, there was a comment that when one of these public houses becomes vacant,
yes,
that we then that we currently have, that we then make it a social house. That's not the case, is it?
No, it's not. So
okay. That's what I wanted to clarify.
Yep.
Thank you. That's fine.
Thank you very much, Jason. It's short notice. Now back to Councillor Rutherford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have one question. Just in regards to the comments that David, you made around, I guess, Huia Street, the depot, Summer Haze opportunities, I just wondered, how do we, or where is the opportunity to sort of take a step back and consider this alongside, you know, specifically retaining some properties for the council to build in and hold on to ourselves? How do we consider this opportunity alongside these other ones without holding anything up? Like, is there an opportunity to retain 26 properties with the intention of reviewing those alongside these other decisions and not necessarily committing to building on them?
Excuse me, Councillor. Oh, sorry. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
So I haven't finished, but do you know where I'm going? I'm just wondering, how do we not derail this, because obviously it's got some great revenue associated with it, but also recognizing that actually if we are having public housing of any sort, there are inner city opportunities also.
So sections won't be available until August 2021, according to the timeframe, by which time you'll have a new long-term plan. So one of the things, you know, the request here is about some financial modelling, but it seems to me there needs to be, maybe a slightly broader conversation at some point between now and the LTP about how council wants to, what is council's role going to be over and above its social housing in terms of its land development opportunities. We know the ones, you've listed them along with Whakaronga. So my response to that is encourage the council through the LTP process to have a really hard think about how it wants to, focus its attention. If the decision is to retain 26 sections at Whakaronga, then you'll be able to do that before the LTP is adopted. Put all those assumptions into the LTP, even if that just means you're going to hold them for a period of time and to retain the option. But I think it's, as I said a couple of times now, part of a broader conversation as part of the LTP.
So just to confirm then, a decision doesn't need to be made right now around what our intention is with the proposal of the 26 properties. Actually, we could do some modelling to get a clearer picture of what that opportunity, where that opportunity could go, and then we could make a decision through the long-term plan once we've actually considered what opportunities may be coming up with other sites.
Yeah, I can answer that one. So yes, you're right.
Thank you.
Everything you said is correct. Currently, there's no budget for any of this. We haven't budgeted for it to happen. In terms of the long-term plan that currently exists, we had budgeted to sell the sections, and that money is used to repay debt. And so the decision doesn't have to be made today. If we are going to do this, it's probably a long-term plan discussion.
Any further questions, councillors? Okay, there's no further questions, so you may step down. Thank you very much for your report. So we'll now move on to the recommendations. And we have, there's four, there's another one. So we'll, just to be clear, we'll go through, if we can start from the beginning, I think that's easier. So the first one, recommendation. So the first one is that the public housing, rental housing within council's Whakaronga subdivision be presented, so that's straightforward. The second one I have moved is for further financial modelling to be undertaken to include cash flow analysis of the impact of retaining the sections versus selling, also including partnership options, and to come back to finance and performance in August. There is a third recommendation that the Chief Executive be instructed to report back to the August meeting of the Finance and Performance Committee regarding energy and environmental efficiency options for the public housing opportunities in Whakaronga. So I'm assuming we'll do those separately. Councillor Rutherford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry to ask a question at this point. I just want to get some clarification from the Chief Executive around, so some of the conversation we've just had through the questioning obviously captured a wider housing conversation that will come through the long-term plan, but I just want to confirm that actually that information is going to be prepared and presented to us for the long-term plan or around some of those workshops, or do you require a further recommendation to pull that together? Basically just looking at a broader scope of the housing opportunities in the city.
I think we would require a broader conversation than what at the moment is scheduled to come through, because this hasn't been agreed to, so it's not in there as part of sure. the plan for the long term. I'll move a additional recommendation. The difficulty, if I just may say while answering that question, is on the third motion. It's hard to do that if we haven't decided that we are actually proceeding. So having them both come back in August may be a bit premature.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And you'll put that recommendation forward. First of all, I think probably we'll discuss option 3, and then we'll go back to the other 2. So Brent, if you want to, while we're waiting, do you want to speak to your?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Certainly happy to speak to the recommendation, and I do acknowledge that there's always that question of when you start the conversation about something as important as energy efficiency and environmental efficiency of any opportunity that we consider around this table. My view is that it is worth starting that conversation now and beginning to get some information now for a couple of reasons. One is it will have some impact on the overall financial picture, especially if we start talking about things like solar panels that might actually generate some power and contribute to the overall financial picture around those buildings. And secondly, at some point around this table, we will be making a decision about whether or not we proceed with this. And part of that decision will be based on the hard financial analysis. And part of that decision will be based on the value proposition of holding housing in public ownership, as well as the value proposition of potentially being able to demonstrate the sort of environmental technologies that can be used in housing developed with an eye to the future. So I would rather have that information to hand so that when we do come to the point of making a decision on this particular opportunity, we're able to consider that with specific information rather than at a conceptual level. So I'd ask you to support the recommendation so that we have information to hand that is relevant for the overall decision that we will need to make in due course on Whakaronga.
I seconded this motion. I agree with what one of the other councillors said. It's a bit like the cart before the horse, but I did feel that it was a good timing for having this information, because we could apply it to any of the other developments, also have that information available for when we do sell those sections, the other portion of the sections, that we do have a lot of the information available for what people can do with those sections. Councillor Naylor, you wanted to speak?
Thank you. I support the general intent of this recommendation, but feel I don't think I can support it in its current wording, because it's referring to public housing opportunity in Whakaronga, which is quite specific, and that preempts the fact that I don't believe we've actually yet made a decision about whether we're proceeding with that. I think in a broader sense, I support us exploring environmental efficiency options for any developments that we may do in the future, but I think we need to get the first conversation first. And just to explain where I'm coming from with that a little bit, I guess that this paper has brought up a lot of suggestions and a lot of issues, and also a few questions, and it's actually, from my perspective, I would appreciate a broader conversation about how we could achieve those goals. It may be that council opting to develop some of those properties may be an option, but I'm not certain if think that that's the best option yet, because we haven't had the financials. And I'd also like to explore some of the partnership opportunities with organisations such as Te Tihi, where they do a rent to buy, or such as Homes for People. There are other organisations who may be able to meet the need that I think we're identifying is there, that gap in the market for that perhaps lower to middle income rental or buy where those smaller houses aren't being currently developed by property developers, as far as we understand. So I'll just hold up, perhaps I won't support that at this time, but certainly support the intent for us to look at that work at some point. But I feel it would be premature to progress that just yet, particularly for a report to come back in August.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Really, to follow up the point Councillor Naylor has made, and to seek the movers' consideration perhaps of a slight rewording there to say, rather than the public housing opportunity, which, as Councillor Naylor said, doesn't as yet exist, any public housing opportunity considered by PNCC. So just broadening the scope of what that's looking for, I think might assist in starting the work that you are seeking. I'm not convinced that August is entirely doable, but I'm certainly interested in that report and of that kind of scope.
So Councillor Barrett, would you be happy with that or not? It's your recommendation. Okay. And as a seconder, I'm happy to do that. So if we could just change that, take out, just put any public housing opportunities and take out Whakaronga.
Thank you.
That will be okay. Are there any more comments on that item 3? Oh yes, in the August one. It's not, so okay. So when could you have that? Okay. We'll put October and then we can negotiate. Yeah. Put October and we'll negotiate if it's available. Thank you. Okay, because this is slightly different to the overall recommendation, we'll move this one. We've had the comments, so we'll vote on this item number 3 because that can go ahead without the other one. So is everybody happy to take it on the voices? Okay, all those in favour? Anybody against? So that's carried. So now we'll go back to the substantive motion, which we'll do 1, 2 together. And I'll speak to that one. The reason I'd like to keep this out of the 10-year plan is because of the urgency of rental accommodation in the city. I was at a real estate agent's yesterday, and the type of accommodation that this would bring would be what I call, like the new build is more the executive housing. And there's no executive rental accommodation in this city. We've got projects coming in from NZTA, Defence, and the queues of people that are waiting for rental accommodation. And that's to sell those sections to first home builders still doesn't take away the issue we've got right through the rental market. I mean, right at the bottom end, the middle end, the top end, we have got hundreds of people waiting for rental property. The reason I have put item number 2 through is because in the paper that was presented to us, there's a lot of information lacking for me to be able to make a decision going forward. There's issues about, I specifically asked for 1/3 of the sections. We've only been given 26. The 1/3 of the sections should be around 40 close to 40. There's no real data in here about the impact of the 10-year plan. There's no cash flows in here. I've got question marks from the conversations around how it impacts the social housing, the costs, the maintenance. There's nothing in here about partnership opportunities going forward. So by bringing item number 2 back, it gives me opportunities to meet with the Chief Financial Officer so that we have a proper financial analysis done of the project. Then the next meeting that comes back to finance and performance, you can look at those impacts, then we can decide on a strategy going forward. Is this a yes or no? So today, to me, I don't feel we've got enough information to be able to make that decision from the information that's presented. So are there any, Councillor Johnson?
Thanks, Madam Chair. I agree with your comments. And I think I would say as well that in the paper that we received, there did seem to be a few comments about social housing. And in the verbal presentation, the officers made it quite clear this is not about social housing. And I think that needs to be very clear in any reports we receive, as well as in our own minds. This isn't a social housing proposition. The fact that it's not near a bus route or those sorts of, they're not considerations in this particular decision. This is about public rentals at a market rent. So I think that distinction needs to be made quite clearly at the start. I don't think whether or not we choose to go ahead with this project should be delayed because of either considerations about building elsewhere on land that's not even yet being freed, some of it, or because of a 10-year plan process coming up. Because remember that even approving the 10-year plan is still 12 months away. So how far away would any houses be? There is urgency. And I think I would really like to see some evidenced figures. So about things like the maintenance requirements in actual figures, about the capital gain, because I think the fact that if these houses were built, they would be an asset on council's books, which should the housing market change and they no longer be needed for public rentals, could be sold, no doubt with a capital gain. That factors into our decision making as to whether or not this is a sensible decision. And I would also like to say, I think we should be all aware, virtually every presenter that comes to this council and committees at the moment is telling us that their particular project or area of work is limited by the housing situation in Palmerston North. And housing prices, even after the pandemic economic hit, are still going up in Palmerston North, and that's because there's a lack of houses. And whilst I take on board the officer's comments about freeing up land and leaving this to the market to sort out, the reality is that the market hasn't sorted this out. That's why we're in this situation. And that's why I think it's incumbent on us to do something that's a bit of a game changer. So I agree we don't have the figures to make a final decision right now. But for me, the impetus for why we're doing this is because we have left it to the market for a large number of years and the market has not provided. And therefore, I think it behoves us to look at least very closely into whether or not this will be sensible for us to do. So I support further figures coming back, and I support them coming back in a timely way. And I concur that the original motion intended it to be a third of the total number of the sections, and not for them to be all in the first stage either. So I will leave it there and let someone else comment, but are very supportive of these recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Armstrong.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am supportive of the resolution also. I'd just like to make a couple of comments reflecting on the discussion that we've heard around the table. And I guess the first thing is that these issues are complex and they involve tactical and strategic trade-offs around policy objectives And whilst there's a number of very, very good comments and a lot of good information in the report, I think, and this is not intended to be a criticism, but when I look at it, it probably lacks a financial framework which helps inform those debates. And when I reflect on what's in front of us, we're faced with a proposed choice about developing sections and selling those and receiving an income, a cash flow, as opposed to developing sections, holding, incurring additional costs to build, receiving a stream of incomes, and at some point having the option of monetising an asset. And my view is that what would greatly facilitate understanding the debate and the discussion around the various trade-offs that we will be faced with over a long period of time would be to have a framework to actually assess that financial impact. So it requires setting out the cash flows and then bringing them back to a dollars of today comparable comparison so that you've got an understanding of what the financial implication is, and then you can put that into context around the broader initiatives and imperatives for capital that council faces, and that will inform trade-offs and decisions around policy. So I think it's a good paper and it's a good start, and thank you, but I personally would like to see a little bit more rigour put into developing a decision-making framework around the financial consequences. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Armstrong just stole all my lines. Well done, Steve. I agree. This is really, I mean, it's a good start. Thank you to the officers. But it is a discussion strategically and then a decision whether we want to be involved in this. And there is trade-offs. And I think there is an element of cart before the horse, but I think it's an absolutely necessary discussion to have now. I just want to make a comment on the supply and demand, and look, I'm aware that we've possibly upset the initial plans of where this development was to go, but absolutely, if you're out there in the marketplace, there is nothing to rent, absolutely nothing to rent. And to wait another 2, 3, 4 years before some of these other developments actually hit the ground will be absolutely got at the whim of the market. And it hasn't worked to date. We've actually set up a housing steering group to look at this sort of stuff, and this is one of the things that came out of it. So I would support these recommendations. I do think we need to have more rigour around the finances. Our housing needs are definitely there. We are actually building a lot more houses, but they are different houses. They are what I'd call the cookie cutter group home builds. In more mid to executive level, we have got a massive hole in that lower level and in rentals. And they just don't have to be housing rentals. They can be like Rolleston. I remember going to Rolleston, having a look at some planned developments there around medium density, small section houses. There's certainly opportunities in that space. It isn't social housing either, it's public rental housing, and I think Mr. Armstrong pointed out the facts of how we could do it if we decided to go down that path. But look, I do think we need some more rigour around the finances of it. We need the CFO to be involved in it, boots and all, because it is such a big project. But I think Palmerston North will continue to leak in terms of housing, to the Fieldings, to the Paetuas, to the Wanganuis, to the Kapiti Coast. Even some of our own staff can't get houses. So I think this is very necessary. So please support this.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Harvey.
I think my comments have been covered.
Okay, I think that covers everybody. Oh, sorry, Councillor Bowen.
Sorry, I'm down the bottom of the table here. I just want to say that I support us taking what is feeling a bit like a two-track approach here of pursuing this opportunity at some pace, bringing the report that you're identifying in recommendation 2 back to August so that we can make decisions in a timely way, while also looking at the impact of that on the long-term plan and the recommendation that Councillor Rutherford indicated would come forward. I don't think there's a conflict between those two things. In fact, we have to kind of get our ducks in a row, and one should flow into the other quite nicely. What I don't want to see is us get to the long-term plan and start this conversation. We need to be down that path so that we can put a proposal out to the community through the long-term plan process for where this sits. And I think it triggers a conversation for us about taking a more policy-led approach to those future opportunities. So very supportive of where we are now.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bond. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and very much in line with the comments we've heard around the table in terms of the direction that we're forming up here. My comment that I wanted to add to that was specifically around the second recommendation, where it begins to canvass partnership options. And yes, we should be looking at those, as it says, from the financial perspective, but I would hope that both the report and our subsequent debate is sufficiently cognizant of the complexity elements that come into those, as well as the risk elements that come into those, so that we actually have a very holistic view of what it might mean to go down that path versus the other options that are available to us. Madam Chair.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Similar to what others have said, really, I really support the financials coming back to us in a way that will help inform the decisions that we need to make going forward. I think it's clear that we don't want to leave the need for housing just to the market, and we do want to take an active approach. In my mind, at this point, I'm not clear whether that should be that council should be the developer of the land, or whether council should partner with other agencies or organisations who may be able to achieve the same result, or in fact a mixture of the two. So I'm really happy with the fact that this recommendation does include exploring any partnership options in that report that will come back, because I think that will help inform perhaps what will be the best way forward.
Thank you, Councillor. And I think that's the end of all the comments. I won't worry about a right of reply. I think you've said enough for me today. Before we vote on that, I'd just like to go to the fourth recommendation, because I think that's straightforward and that we can wrap that up. That the conversation around wider housing development opportunities be referred to the long-term plan, and that's first and seconder. Councillor Rutherford, do you want to speak? Yes.
Just one comment is that for me, I want to know that if we've only got a set amount of money to invest in a housing development project, that I've been able to consider all the options before making the decision as to where I want to invest that money. And so that's what this recommendation is doing for me. So it's not taking away from the potential opportunity at Whakaronga. It's not moving in the direction of a particular piece of property that we already own in the city, but it's just, for me, I'm just saying I'm happy to get the information to inform these decisions as per recommendation 1 and 2, but also actually I want to make sure that we're considering our options rather than just saying we'll do this one and then getting to something else in 6 months' time and realising actually financially we can't do both. So that's what this is about.
Councillor Johnson, did you wish to speak?
It was just really more a question to the mover about the clarity of the motion, if that's okay. Yep. So I wondered if we needed to include a wider housing development opportunities for council, because it's not housing development opportunities for the city. It's is my understanding of it. It's about housing opportunities for us as a council. So okay. Do you think we could add that in so it's more specific? Yeah.
Yep. You're happy with that, Councillor? Yes. Okay. So is everybody happy that we take the recommendations together and there's no need for a division? Good. We'll wait for the report to come back about that, because that's a bigger piece of work. And it's going towards the long-term plan, so it'll be in, I'm assuming, You weren't expecting a report back, Councillor Rutherford?
No, the reason it's a little bit vague is that it potentially could be a workshop, a standalone workshop. It could be a report. It's up to the CEO to determine how she includes that conversation as a part of the long-term plan discussion.
So giving direction. Yep. Okay, so we'll now go to the vote. So we're voting for 1, 2 and 4. Thank you, Natalia. So all those in favour? And anyone against? That's carried. Right, we need to motor. So we're on to our item number 9, which is the CET Arena report. So Bryce, you're in the hot seat again. Bryce, I think we'll take that report as read unless you wish to add anything new.
No, I'm happy for that. Happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you. Councillors, are there any questions for Bryce around the report? Councillor Naylor.
Thanks, Bryce. Just the program 1514 Central Energy Trust Arena. I understood in a report that came to Infrastructure Committee a couple of weeks ago that some of that program had already been reallocated. I think 600 and something thousand of it had been reallocated to the current work. So I just wondered if it would be appropriate to clarify that in light of the recommendation 1, which the report hasn't sort of acknowledged that, and so it may just be relevant to see is the recommendation still appropriate in the current way, given that that has already partially been reallocated to current work that's happening.
Either works really. We can modify it if you like, but you are correct. $619,000 was reallocated from this program into the current arena redevelopment as part of the acceptance of the construction contract. And yeah, I mean, basically the balance of that, we are only 2 weeks out from the end of the financial year, but the balance of that will not be spent. And the work that we have had to do to date to form this report was unable to be capitalised, so it could not be spent.
So could we change, would it be more appropriate to change that to not proceed with the balance of program 1514?
I'm okay with that.
It's just a wording, so happy to change that. So with the balance, thank you, Natalia. So any, Councillor Rutherford?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is for the Chief Executive around the process for recommendation 2. So when we refer something through for consideration as part of the long-term plan, the approach that's been taken in the past has been that it's assumed that it's included in the long-term plan. So I guess the first iteration of the draft is that comes to elected members would then have that in there. And so if we just went with recommendation 1, would it be, if we just did not proceed and left a full stop after that sentence type thing, then would it be that we just did not pass recommendation 2? Sorry, I don't think that was a very good question.
If you only I think that's still relevant. If you passed number 1 that you don't proceed in this financial year, and then you put the second one, and that failed, then it would not go into the long-term plan discussions. It would disappear.
We would just leave it at that.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
But putting both of them is still relevant.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What if, everybody going to say aye in the result of the first recommendation. What if the council says no? Would they construct it in the 2 weeks?
The answer is the program still exists, and we would have to come back to council, assuming everybody wanted it to go ahead. It's certainly not going to go ahead in this financial year because there's 2 weeks left, but there is an opportunity to carry that budget forward to the following year.
All right, thank you.
Can I just say that this has been delayed because of COVID. We would have bought it a lot earlier, but things didn't work out that way.
Right.
I suppose just to sort of further add to that as well, if we did defer it into next financial year, there would need to be a need for that and the ability to actually spend that money. And until we've actually sort of made a decision on whether we're actually going to build it or not, a lot of those costs are just operationalised, so I couldn't actually use the budget anyway, even if I had it next year, which was the case this year as well.
Thank you, Bryce. Are there any further questions? Councillor, pay attention. Any further questions? Okay, thanks, Bryce. You may step down. So the recommendations 1 and 2, do you want to move those together? Thank you, Councillor Harpeta. Seconder, Councillor Finlay. I'll separate them. Seconder. Thank you, Councillor Dennison. So does anybody want to comment? Councillor Rutherford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to support recommendation 1, but I'm not going to support recommendation 2 at this stage. I think that if we leave it out of the long-term plan and we just say at the moment we're not going ahead with a commercial building, that doesn't mean that in future we may not revisit that or come back to that. But the reality is that through our long-term plan, we're going to have to be making some decisions around what stays and what goes. The master plan for the arena already allows for space for this development to happen. And we already know that Sport Manawatu at this stage are unwilling to partner with the council to see Sports House realised, which is obviously what this originally was about. And so from my perspective, I think actually we can say that, no, we don't proceed with this at this point in time, and then we can leave the conversation there. And if an opportunity comes up in future, the space is still there, and we can revisit it then. It doesn't change anything in the arena master plan apart from leaving maybe a bit more of a gap. But so that's my view, is that I'll be opposing recommendation 2 but supporting recommendation 1.
Councillor Harpeta.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I think we should leave it in. We've already consulted on it. It's already in the long-term plan. So I think that actually it's in the master plan. We should be leaving it in. We've already gone through this. We've already gone round the ring road on this. So I think that should be putting and leaving 1 and 2 in. We've already done our consultation on this for the master plan for this. So I do think we should be leaving both of them in.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm of the view that the first recommendation is to be supported, but I'm not supportive of the second recommendation. Does the city need skyboxes or does the city need affordable housing? I think we know the answer to that question, and there is a finite pool of money here, and we should be very careful and very strategic with any decision we make around putting public money, in this case would be interfering effectively in the private market around commercial space in the city. And I'm not prepared to even suggest that it goes as far as the long-term plan. There's a great plenty already in the long-term plan that we can and will need to work with, and to further complicate it with this suggestion is an unnecessary use of our time and potentially takes us down a path that we simply do not want or need to contemplate. I'd further add that the location here is of concern to me. If, and it would be a huge if, we would ever invest in commercial development, that should be inside the city center, not contributing to and exacerbating what we already know is a donut effect that's happening in this city. So I'd leave it there and urge you to not support recommendation 2.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I understand some councillors have some predetermined views on it, but I would have to say, let it go into the draft long-term plan. It may not make it it's going to be, there's some difficult prioritisation decisions to make, but let's have that debate then, not now. I would say that Arena actually is in our CBD. It's not on the outskirts of town. In fact, it's one of its strengths, being so close to the square. I'm supportive of both of them. Yes, there's some financial decisions and probably some policy decisions to make, but to actually cut it now is far too predetermined. And I urge you to at least keep it in. And if it makes it, it makes it, but it'll have to live and die on its business case then. But please support it going forward. Thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will support recommendation 1, but won't be supporting recommendation 2 for similar reasons that Councillor Rutherford and Barrett have already outlined. But in addition to that, I think we need to remember that we've already brought a number of the Arena programs from years 3, 4, 5 earlier to enable the current program of work that is happening. I think the comment to say let it go into the draft and then we can go from there. I think for those of us who have been around the table to do one LTP, and many of you who've been around the table to do more than one LTP, I think it's very difficult to take an item out of the draft once it's been consulted on. I think we're better to take a cautious approach given that the many competing priorities there are going to be as we go into the long-term plan discussions. We certainly haven't consulted on a building of this value. We haven't consulted on this. I don't believe we've consulted on a building in the way that this described in this paper. So I don't believe we've had a mandate from the community to be proceeding with this in any way at this stage. So yeah, I won't support recommendation 2.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think similar to a couple of the speakers, I'm very supportive of us not doing this in the next fortnight. Absolutely excellent. But also I won't be supporting item 2. I'm reflecting on the presentation that we heard from Sport Manawatu just a few weeks ago, where they indicated they were very happy to partner with council in Sport House. They just didn't want it to be at the arena. They've walked away from that option. The consultation that we did was on a Sport House partnership project with Sport Manawatu at the arena. That option is now off the table, and so for me, I'm quite comfortable that that should come out of our long-term plan at this time. So I'll be voting against item 2.
Are there any other comments? Oh, sorry, Councillor Finlay. Yeah, I forgot to write you down.
Oh, again. I will support 1, but I will not support 2. And 1 or 2 people have said that there's been consultation. Well, I'd just like to just read out 7.1 on the order paper here. No formal public consultation has been undertaken on the construction of a commercial building on this site. So I will not support 1 because there has been no consultation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further comments? Okay, we will go for a division on this one.
Do 1 first.
So we'll go for recommendation 1. I'll move that, which I have, and we'll vote on that first. So all those in favour?
Aye.
Carried. Anybody against? So we now go to option 2. Sorry, not option 2, recommendation 2. It's been a longer morning than I anticipated.
On recommendation 2, Councillor Dingwall.
Against.
Against. Councillor Hancock. For. Mr Armstrong. Abstain. Councillor Meehan. For. Mayor Smith. For. Councillor Bowen. Against. Councillor Harpeter. For. Councillor Naylor.
Against.
Against. Councillor Johnson.
Against.
Against. Councillor Barrett.
Against.
Against. Councillor Rutherford. Against. Councillor Beattie?
Against.
Against. Councillor Petrinas? Against. Councillor Dennison? For. Councillor Finlay?
Against.
Against. Councillor Butt?
Against.
Against.
Thank you, Hannah. So that is lost with 5 votes for, 10 against and 1 abstention. So we'll now move on to the last item, which is the work schedule. And I'd just like to, item number 2, that has been moved to September. It's got August, so we're moving that to September. And that is so we can break that into 2 reports. One is pre-COVID and the other is the learnings of it. So we get the full report in September for that. Are there any comments? I'm happy to move the work schedule. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Naylor. All those in favour?
Aye.
Again, carried. So I now close the meeting of Finance and Performance. So somebody want to let people know about your meeting, Councillor Ruapehu? 1 o'clock. So back here at 1 o'clock.